Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking something absolutely fascinating: how we actually take phenotypic age from a cool theoretical algorithm in a research paper and slam it into a strict, highly structured clinical reality. If you've ever wondered how this cutting-edge longevity science gets operationalized for daily medical practice, well, you're in exactly the right place.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover beyond chronological age, the biomarker algorithm itself, ensuring algorithmic accuracy, interpreting patient results, clinical viability and scale, and finally, the strict operational mandates making this all possible. Let's dive right in.
Starting off with Section 1, Beyond Chronological Age. This is a fundamental paradigm shift in how we track human aging.
This entire explainer is anchored in Morgan Levine's groundbreaking 2018 methodology published in PLOS 1. This isn't just some passing health trend, it's a rigorously validated scientific framework that completely rewrites the rules on how we measure aging in a clinical setting.
And look at the stark contrast here between these two metrics. On the left, you've got chronological age. It's fixed, purely temporal, and honestly, a pretty terrible predictor of functional decline or individual disease risk. But on the right, we have phenotypic age. It's dynamic. It shows actual physiological decline and functional capacity. Most importantly, it's highly predictive of morbidity and a patient's 10-year mortality risk. It literally shifts the focus from how long have you been breathing to how well is your body actually functioning.
Moving to Section 2, the biomarker algorithm. So what exactly is the scientific engine measuring to figure out this physiological decline? It turns out the algorithm needs exactly 10 inputs. We're talking 9 specific blood markers pulled from your standard metabolic and blood panels, things evaluating liver, kidney, and metabolic function, plus systemic inflammation and immune health. You take those 9, add the patient's actual chronological age, and boom, you've got your inputs.
The real kicker here is that while these are totally standard lab metrics, the secret sauce is entirely in the math. Every single one of these blood and immune markers is assigned a proprietary weighted coefficient. But there's a slight catch for international labs. Since the original algorithm was built on US metrics, precise unit conversion into international SI units is absolutely mandatory before any of that math can even happen.
You can see how that workflow plays out in this conversion matrix. Raw lab data in SI units has to be converted, like say, dividing creatinine by 88.4 or multiplying glucose by 18.01. Once the data is basically speaking the right language, it gets fed straight into the Gompertz proportional hazard engine. That engine applies those weighted coefficients and spits out the final physiological outputs.
Which brings us to Section 3, ensuring algorithmic accuracy. Because listen, an algorithm is literally only as good as the data you feed it. Garbage in, garbage out, right?
To stop that from happening, clinical discipline has to be absolute. Look at these 3 locks. This is our 3-step gatekeeper protocol. Things like transient immune activation can severely skew parameters, especially white blood cell count and hsCRP. So patients are strictly mandated to do a 12-hour water-only fast to stabilize metabolic markers. Second, they need 0 active infections. We need a completely clean immune baseline. And third, absolute physical recovery. That means absolutely no heavy or vigorous exercise for 24 hours before the blood draw. If you don't enforce these prerequisites, you completely invalidate the algorithmic outputs, period.
But naturally, this introduces a massive clinical headache. Fasting protocols rely entirely on subjective patient reporting. Did they actually fast for 12 hours? How was their sleep? Fasting glucose is incredibly volatile, and that variance is a massive threat to our precise algorithmic engine. So how we eliminate this human error? The clinical solution? It's this brilliant operational swap right here. We replace that volatile fasting glucose with HbA1c. Why? Well, HbA1c acts as a proxy that captures a highly stable 120-day glycemic average. It completely eliminates short-term patient variability and just bypasses compliance errors altogether. It takes all the guesswork out of the algorithm.
Okay, Section 4, interpreting patient results. Let's look at how all this science translates into tangible, actionable data for a doctor to actually discuss with a patient.
The Gompertz engine generates 2 super clear outputs. First up is metric 1, age acceleration. This is simply phenotypic age minus chronological age. Positive values mean accelerated biological aging. The dial is definitely moving into the red. Negative values mean biological youth. Then we have metric 2, the 10-year mortality score. This is a direct, hard statistical probability of mortality within the next decade. all based on their specific biomarker weightings.
Let's put this into perspective and compare two real-world outcomes. Patient profile A is a 70-year-old with elevated out-of-range markers. The math shows their accelerated phenotypic age is 84. That is 14 years accelerated, giving them a staggering 63.8% 10-year mortality score. Now, contrast that with patient profile B, a 53-year-old with optimized clinically low normal ranges. Biologically, they are calculating at just 43.8 years old, almost a full decade younger, which drastically plummets their mortality risk to just 2.7%. I mean, that is the raw power of phenotypic age.
Moving to Section 5, clinical viability and scale. Because generating these profiles is scientifically fascinating, sure, but how do we actually scale this operationally without bankrupting the entire medical system?
I love this quote from the clinical directors meeting. It really hits the nail on the head. If you run a test and it costs 100,000 NTD, it's not feasible. An R&D luxury is completely useless to us if it isn't accessible, rapid, and scalable for daily ops. If it takes too long or costs way too much, it completely fails as a widespread clinical tool.
This comparison matrix shows exactly why blood phenotypic age wins out for daily operations. Yeah, epigenetic clocks using DNA methylation are insanely accurate, but they cost upwards of 100,000 NTD, take weeks or even months to process, and require heavy R&D integration. Blood phenotypic age, though, it uses standard blood panels, it's highly affordable, integrates immediately, and crucially, has a 24-hour operational turnaround. It's a scalable clinical reality right now.
And because it's so affordable, we can establish a really dynamic clinical monitoring cadence. To track health interventions accurately, operations have to stick to a very precise timeline. Phase 1 establishes the baseline using 2 independent blood tests spaced 1 to 2 weeks apart. That accounts for any short-acting fluctuations. Then, Phase 2 is standard health monitoring, retesting at strict 90-day intervals. Why exactly 90 days? Because that aligns perfectly with the multi-week and month-long half-lives of cellular metrics. Think about the lifespan of a red blood cell. This lets doctors accurately track whether biological age is reversing or accelerating over time.
Finally, Section 6, strict operational mandates. Executing that 90-day cadence successfully across hundreds or thousands of patients, that requires the clinical lab to operate with absolute military-grade precision.
The executive mandate here is totally uncompromising. First mandate, a 24-hour turnaround time. Data goes in, results come out within exactly 1 day. No exceptions whatsoever. Second mandate, minimum stock assurance. Having an out-of-stock failure for reagents or test kits is deemed absolutely unacceptable. If the clinic runs out of supplies, the entire monitoring timeline collapses.
The clinical director's tone was crystal clear on this. Missing a 24-hour SLA or running out of supplies is a critical operational failure. To ensure that doesn't happen, they've implemented mandatory daily inventory audits that have to be formally signed off by both the procurement and legal departments. We're talking about a high-stakes operational environment where logistical efficiency is literally just as important as the science itself.
Now, while immediate operations are locking down standard operating procedures for this insanely tight supply chain, the future R&D track definitely isn't sitting still. They're already evaluating ABCM kits for VEGF assessment and monitoring emerging proteomics, specifically proteins like GDF11, for future integration into the algorithm. They're also looking into rapid screening automated tech, like microfluidics, to support even higher throughput demands down the road.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound operational and scientific question. As rapid screening automated technologies merge with this highly dynamic, affordable biological tracking, are we approaching a future where asking a patient their chronological age becomes entirely obsolete in medical diagnostics? It certainly looks that way. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep questioning the numbers.